Okay, we are live for the Tuesday night podcast. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com is the website where you can tune in every Tuesday night at 8:30 p.m. I say it's a Tuesday night podcast, but we release this thing through the week as an audio podcast. You might listen to it then, or you might tune in and you might watch the video stream at some point during the week. But we are live on Tuesday nights at 8:30 every week. And that's kind of where I like to think that the magic happens. It's the Panther-Lair Show. I'm Chris Peak from Panther-Lair.com. You should know that website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com, the most comprehensive source of Pitt sports news on the internet. Of course, you can find everything you want to know about Pitt sports right there at Panther-Lair.com. And, of course, there's message boards where you can talk to hundreds and thousands of other Pitt fans and chat with them about everything going on in the world of Pitt sports. It's really the place to be if you want to have Pitt conversation. You want to go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. I'm a big fan of the online community there, and I think if you check it out, you will be too. It's good conversation, good people, good Pitt fans, some lively discussion, some arguments, as you're bound to have when you get a lot of people together. And then every Tuesday night we get together and, chat a little bit. And I always say the fun thing about the live streams, you can jump in, you can join the chat function there and put some questions, put some comments, and we can interact. We can go back and forth and have a little conversation about Pitt sports. I mean, I could sit here and talk to you for a while, and that's what I'll do. But you can also post your comments and your questions, and we can have a conversation. We can have a back and forth, and that's what's kind of fun about it. And I figure there's always a lot to talk about when it comes to Pitt. We've got the NFL draft to recap as far as how Pitt did there, give you some thoughts on that, and also looking ahead. We've got the photos rolling here in the slideshow. You can see. On the right corner of the screen, see a lot of guys, who are our potential draft prospects for 2022. Who do we really need to be keeping an eye on? Who's got the potential to be drafted? I think there's a number of guys on this roster who are probably in that position already, and also could play themselves into it. I think have a real chance that they're borderline NFL prospects right now, and they have a chance with a really good 2021 season to put themselves into the conversation for a draft spot and getting selected next year. And we'll talk about that and maybe what those guys need to do or what they need to show over the next 8 months, 10 months, 12 months to make themselves into draft picks. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about NFL draft status and why sometimes having a lot of draft picks doesn't always equate to success on the field, because I know that's one of the talking points that has come up in the wake of the NFL draft over the weekend when Pitt had 6 players selected. Why did they only win 6 games last year? You only get 1 win for every draft pick. I don't think it exactly works like that, but I think there is some context to put into some of those numbers. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about basketball. If you want to talk about basketball, somebody even said when I tweeted out earlier this evening, I tweeted out, hey, Panther-Lair Show, 8:30, make sure you tune in. And somebody said, I hope there's some hoops updates. Well, I don't necessarily have any updates because it's just sort of is what it is right now. We're just trying to track down anybody that the staff is pursuing. We think those guys are out there. We think the staff is working on guys. It can be hard to find them at times. And so, just kind of like Daniel Adapo and Jamarius Burton kind of came out of nowhere. I wouldn't be surprised if the next news that comes as far as Pitt adding a player kind of comes out of nowhere. I think they're still involved with Efton Reed, the 5-star center, but who knows what's happening there. I think there's some tough competition from some schools that, don't always lose those kind of recruiting competitions. And so that's going to make that one challenging. So plenty to watch on that front. Got to give a quick shout out to our friends, of course, at Home Field Apparel. I've got the warm up the Victory Lights shirt on today. I always kind of show it off. I've got the yellow one and the gray one. I told them they need to get me some new Home Field Pitt shirts that I can show off on the podcast. But it is funny if you go to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, and you click to look at all the previous live streams. They're all me wearing either this yellow shirt, the gray Pitt shirt with the sort of vintage Panther logo on it, or the sweatshirt that they sent me, the really nice Hawaii Rainbow Warriors sweatshirt. I like wearing these things. I want to show them to you guys so you can see them because, there's one of our sponsors on the podcast. We really appreciate their support. And I wear it because I really like the shirts. They're really comfortable. They're really soft. And I think they got great graphics on it, great logos. And it's definitely t-shirt season now. It's nice and warm out. You should go find yourself some really nice Pitt shirts at homefieldapparel.com. Make sure you go check them out. And they're in the process of getting new stuff out for a lot of the schools. We'll see if they come out with anything new for Pitt. So if you're familiar with their collection, or if you got things from their collection, you might want to keep an eye on it and see if they come out with something new to add to the collection. I'm sure if they do, it's going to be awesome, because that's what Home Field does. So homefieldapparel.com, you want to go check them out. I think that's everybody we want to talk about. See if people are filtering in here on the live stream. Yeah, we got a lot of people jumping in. Getting in on the conversation already, and already people asking about the Efton Reed situation. We'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to start with the draft, though. Pitt had 6 guys selected. I'm sure you saw this. You followed along. Patrick Jones went in the 3rd round. Rashad Weaver went in the 4th. Jason Pinnock in the 5th. Jalen Twyman and Damar Hamlin went in the 6th, and then Jimmy Morrissey went in the 7th. It was 6 players drafted, the most since 2004, when Larry Fitzgerald led a group of 6. They had 3 defensive linemen drafted, the most since 1981, when I think they had 3 drafted that year, and that doesn't even count Hugh Green and Ricky Jackson. Those guys, of course, played on the defensive line at Pitt, went into the NFL as linebackers, but it's, you get the general point. It's been a long time. It's been a long time since Pitt has had this kind of draft success. You go back to 2004 for the last time they had 6 guys drafted. That's 17 years. You go back 40 years for the last time they had this many defensive linemen drafted in a single year. It doesn't feel like an historic draft for Pitt, but it is. In the numbers and just kind of overall what went down. And first off, you say congratulations to all those guys. Rashad Weaver and Patrick Jones, it's been told many times, came into Pitt as 2-star prospects. And we'll, I'll be the first to admit we screwed that up. And I think there are people at Rivals who would say they screwed that up. Jones, I think, is a guy whose body really developed after he got to college. If you look at Patrick Jones in high school, he was not the player that he is now. He was not the player that he was in his final years at Pitt, when he was a really dominant defensive end. He grew a lot and developed a lot, and that's a credit to him for putting in the work. It's a credit for Charlie Partridge, putting in the work with Jones to help him develop like that. I kind of understand it, although Jones still had a bunch of Power 5 offers. I think he had NC State. I think he had Virginia Tech. He had other ACC opportunities, so it's not like he was this totally, it's not like it was, Pitt offered him and all his other offers were either MAC offers or FCS offers or something like that. So, I think colleges saw the potential there. But I think when you look at his senior film, you look at, kind of how he was built coming out of high school, not exactly a guy who's going to, that you would look at and say, well, that guy's going to be a 3rd-round pick. Rashad Weaver, though, a little surprised that we never had him higher than a 2-star, and I don't really understand it. He's in Florida. It's a talent-rich state. It's a state that has a lot of eyes on it. He was a guy who was committed to Michigan for a long time, and he never really climbed out of that 2-star range, and I'm surprised about that. And even after he sort of decommitted from Michigan / got dropped by Michigan, exactly, how that story went, he was looking at Pitt. I think he was looking at Penn State, and considering maybe USF or Temple or something like that. But, he still had some Power 5 options there, Pitt and Penn State. So the colleges again saw something in Rashad Weaver that, Rivals, we did not. So I think we definitely missed the boat on those 2 guys. The rest of the group, Jimmy Morrissey, I'm not sure that we even had a ranking on Jimmy Morrissey coming out of high school, but he was a guy who, was a walk-on. And that's not to disparage him, but to say that, if we missed the boat on that, college coaches missed the boat on it too. Damar Hamlin had him as a 4-star prospect. I'm a little surprised that Damar slid to the 6th round, to be honest with you. I think Damar, there's always multiple components that go into the draft picks, right? There's senior film, well, not just senior film, but film from college. There's kind of what you're able to ascertain as far as their, football IQ and their understanding of the game. And then there's pro day and how they test and how they perform there. And I feel like DeMar checks the boxes on all three of those. Really, you put on the film, you see a guy who's a really sound tackler, very rarely out of position. You talk to him, and I think if they put him through the whiteboard and had him get up and diagram plays and break down defenses and break down offensive sets and things like that, I think he would do really well in that. DeMar's strength has always been his intelligence and his understanding of the game, kind of his almost technician's approach to the game. That's what DeMar has always been good at. You go back to high school, and I think there were questions about we had him as a 4-star, I think, cornerback prospect when he was coming out of high school, coming out of Central Catholic. I know he was a 4-star, but I think he was a corner on Rivals. But I think there was a feeling that he probably wasn't going to play corner in college because while he's pretty fast, pretty athletic, he wasn't necessarily fast and athletic enough to play corner, in the ACC or in the NFL. But the thing that they always said was, like, he made up for some of that with his understanding of the game, with knowing how to put himself in the right position and how to play. I mean, just being smart and using his instincts, not in a reckless way, but his instincts to play within the defense and execute and always be in the right spot. And I think we saw that. And then he went and had a pretty good pro day. I think he tested better than I expected him to. So I thought he would go sooner than the 6th. I'm a little bit surprised that Hamlin lasted to the 6th, but he'll end up going to the Buffalo Bills. Play with another former Pitt player in Dane Jackson in the secondary there for Buffalo. And it seems like a pretty good spot for him to land. Jalen Twyman is a really interesting situation. He went in the 6th round. He went to the Vikings, who also drafted Patrick Jones. Of course, Brian O'Neill is already there. When you talk about Pitt connections. And Twyman, as he continued to drop through the first 5 rounds, I mean, he was the 15th pick of the 6th round. So we're talking about 5.5 rounds of picks before Twyman finally got selected. And as that went down, as he continued to drop, as the picks came off the board and other D tackles were picked and other defensive linemen were picked and Twyman just kept hanging out there, I think a lot of the conversation became a question of it became a question of how much his decision to opt out of the 2020 season hurt his stock. And I've gone back and forth on this. And the one thing that's always going to be a problem is it's going to be hard to ever get a true sense of what the NFL teams were thinking. And when I started talking about this on Twitter, some people came in and said, well, Kevin Colbert said that they definitely dropped guys who sat out. Yes and no. Yes and no. I think if a guy sat out, but he had really good film from the previous year and he tested really well at his pro day, I don't think he's dropping very far. Now, maybe Kevin Colbert, Steelers GM, said, if we have 2 guys that are rated exactly the same in all other circumstances, nothing else is different, and one guy played and one guy didn't, we're going to drop the guy who didn't. Okay. But tell me how many times it happens you have 2 guys exactly the same in every possible way. I'm pretty sure that that's very rare. And extremely rare, or even more rare, is going to be the case where you find a guy who is just exactly perfect in those comparisons and those evaluations, but one guy opted out and the other one didn't. So I don't know how much of an impact that had on Jalen Twyman. I shouldn't say that. Where I think it impacted Jalen Twyman and where I think it caused his draft stock to drop is that I think there were things he could have shown in 2020. He showed in 2019 that he could rush the passer. He had 10.5 sacks. All right, that is an extremely productive season for a defensive tackle, and he was doing it all over the place. He didn't just load up against lousy opponents. I think he had some of those plays again in the game at Penn State. 10.5 sacks as a defensive tackle, you're grinding out there. You can play. You can play at a high level. Those are Aaron Donald type numbers. However, he only had 12 total tackles for loss. Now, for a guy who was a starting defensive tackle and played a ton, to only have 1.5 tackles for loss that were not sacks says that you need to go out and show that you can do more against the run. That you can make more of an impact beyond just rushing the passer. You're an elite level pass rusher out of the defensive tackle position, but you need to do more than that. You have to be a well-rounded player. You can't just be a situational D tackle who comes in. You're not going to be drafted high as a situational D tackle who can only rush the passer, or has only shown that you can rush the passer. And then, so I think that was what Twyman could have done if he had played in the 2020 season. And I think that's where he cost himself by not playing in the 2020 season. Now, he had an opportunity to earn back some of that. You know what I mean? Build back some capital at Pro Day. And we all saw and got excited about his 40 reps on the bench. And that was wild. You know, that was great, you know. But the rest of his Pro Day wasn't very good. And we can have debates and discussions about how important is it, what a D tackle can do in the 40, or what a D tackle can do in the 3-cone shuttle, or any of this or that. The vertical, does it really matter? Broad jump. I mean, NFL teams value those measurements, and that's why they run those things at the combine, and that's why they run those things at Pro Day. If the NFL teams didn't value those measurements for all positions, they would not do them for all positions. They may value some more than others. They may say, all right, I don't really want the offensive lineman running 40 yards down the field in any situation, so I kind of don't care as much about his 40. But they are going to look at all those measurements, and Twyman's weren't very good. And so when you get the combination of a guy who has shown that he's really good at one thing, didn't really go out and prove in the last year that he was getting better at this other thing, you know, that he was well-rounded, and then doesn't back it up with a really good Pro Day to offset any of those concerns about how balanced his game really is. You end up with a D tackle who had 10.5 sacks dropping into the 6th round. And I think that's, so I don't think it was the decision to sit out. If he had shown in 2019 that he could play really well against the run, if he had 10.5 sacks and 18 tackles for loss or 21 tackles for loss or something like that, so it showed that he was not only rushing the passer well, but he was making an impact in other areas of the game, and then he opted out, but then had a really good Pro Day, he would not have dropped to the 6th round. You know, opt out or not, he would not have dropped to the 6th round. So I don't really think the opt-out is what did it. And, of course, the other one that everyone has talked about, you know, one of the big talking points in the wake of the draft is Paris Ford going undrafted. And here again is a guy who opted out mid-season. I mean, do we even call it an opt-out at that point? I was reading today about Stanford played like 6 games this past season, and they played their first 3, and then their 4th game was supposed to be on the road. They one of their games got canceled or moved or something, postponed. You know, their 4th game was supposed to be on the road, and at that point, Santa Clara County banned all professional and college sports for like a month. So they made their last 3 games all on the road, and they had guys who chose to opt out of those final 3 road games. And in that case, some of the guys that maybe were coming back for this season, I guess you could call that an opt-out. They opted out of the final 3 games with the intention to come back to the team the following year. If they were guys who opted out and had no intention of returning for 2021, if they were guys who opted out and that was the end of their eligibility, you didn't really opt out. You, let's say, left the team. I think calling it leaving the team is probably the most professional way we can make it sound. There are someone who would say that those guys quit, and by definition, that would not be inaccurate. But let's call it leaving the team, departing the team, because Paris Ford left the team. You know, after the Notre Dame game, when Pitt was getting its butt kicked, and there appeared to be some dust-ups on the sideline, some disagreements. Maybe guys were pulled, maybe told to go back in, maybe didn't go back in. You know, it was clear that the sideline was in disarray. And in the wake of that game, Paris Ford decided to leave the team. And you can call it an opt-out, you can call it quit, you can call it leave the team, you can call it departure, you can call it whatever you want to call it, but he left the team. I do not think that's why he went undrafted. All right. The thing with Paris Ford, and you could go back and find these podcasts from last summer. You can find these podcasts from probably December. You can find these podcasts from, November after Paris Ford left the team, and I said the same things. I've said this all along, okay? That when you look at Paris Ford, and 2019 was a sensational, exciting season for him. And he played like one of the most exciting players I've seen in 15 years of covering Pitt. And we're talking about LaShawn McCoy. We're talking about Darrelle Revis. We're talking about Aaron Donald. We're talking about James Conner. We're talking about Tyler Boyd. And I'm not saying he's better than those players, but I am saying that he was just as exciting as those guys, and maybe more so. Because, in 2019, he could make an explosive play on any snap. And he often did. Whether it was a big hit, it was an interception, he made big plays. And there's no question about it. He was a big play machine. But the thing is, he had 2 or 3 interceptions, however many big hits. He played 400 snaps or 500 snaps or something like that. And there's a lot of snaps in there that I think when NFL teams watched the film, they weren't necessarily encouraged by what they saw, because he had a habit of not always following his assignment, of not always being responsible on the field. And this was the thing he needed to improve the most in 2020, is playing within the defense, not totally curtailing his instincts, allowing his instincts to still be a strength, allowing his athleticism and his closing speed and his hitting power and all those things that make him exciting, allowing those things to still be a strength, but operating within the defense so that when you start to freelance, you don't create vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the defensive scheme. It's 11 guys on the field. You got to be one of 11. You might be the best one of the 11, but you got to be one of the 11. And me watching 2019, I saw the interceptions and the big hits and thought this guy's a stud. You watching 2019 probably thought the same thing. We were all excited by what we saw. But from everything I've been told, and again, this is not just in the wake of the draft. I said this stuff over the summer. I said it throughout the offseason last year. I said it this offseason. I said it after he left the team that, look, he was not responsible enough on the field. He did not stick to his assignments enough, whereas in the NFL, they need to believe that they can rely on you. And he needed to improve on that in 2020, and I think the games that he played in 2020, he didn't really improve on it. And I think he played, 7 games? I don't think he improved in those elements during those 7 games. And then he leaves the team. And I'm not going to say if that was a strike for or against him. I mean, depending on whatever story the scouts heard about why he left the team, it might have hurt him. I don't know. But I do know that when he went to his pro day and put up the numbers he put up, it did not help his cause. And so you've got a guy who, when the scouts watch the film, they're going to see a guy who's not always in position, is not always doing his assignment, not always being responsible about it. And then he backs it up with a less than impressive pro day. And you end up dropping out of the draft. You end up going undrafted. And I wish the best for Paris. I've always wished the best for Paris. I've known him, it's 2021. I've been talking to him for about 6 years now, right? 2015, it was probably the first time I interviewed Paris. Talked to him a bunch of times over the last 6 years. And he's a great kid, and he's obviously a very talented football player. But if he wants to make it, and he signed as an undrafted free agent with, I think, the Rams, right? I think he signed with the Rams, probably with some encouragement from Aaron Donald, encouragement from Aaron Donald to the Los Angeles Rams coaching staff and brass that, hey, you should go get this guy. If he wants to make it in the NFL, if he wants to make it with the Rams, he needs to work really hard. Because obviously when you're in high school, if you're a great athlete, you can excel and be the man. You get to college, you can pretty much do that. In the NFL, man, everybody's a great athlete. Everybody's really good. Everybody is, a potential star. Obviously, there are levels to that. There are tiers to that. But what really separates is the guys, they have to work their tails off. And they have to work all the time at it. There's no... You can't take it easy. And as much as we want to, make fun of Juju Smith-Schuster in this town... I shouldn't say we, but as much as Juju Smith-Schuster and his antics with TikTok and social media and the videos and the photos and all this stuff gets kind of mocked a little bit, a lot of those things are showing him working his tail off. And you look at the guy. It doesn't look like he's slacking. You have to work really hard. And I think sometimes guys get to the NFL and find out, holy Cal, I really got to grind out here. I mean, you look at Aaron Donald. You think he's taking it easy? No, he's the best player in the NFL. Certainly the best defensive player in the NFL. Maybe the best player overall in the NFL. No worse than top 5 or top 10. And he is grinding every day. And so if you are, I mean, any of these guys we're talking about, but particularly a guy with Paris Ford who's got the talent that he has that natural ability. You can't just have the ability. You've got to back it up with the work. You have to. Or else, you're not going to make it. So, Paris Ford, we talked about Damar Hamlin. Jason Pinnock. Now, Jason Pinnock's a really interesting situation. Goes in the 5th round, picked by the Jets, right? Pinnock is a guy who he was a pretty good player over his first 3 years. I think his senior year was his best year. I think his film was best as a senior. And then once the season ended, he worked his tail off and had a great pro day. Put up incredible numbers that were not just a product of pure athleticism, but were clearly a product of training. He took his training seriously. He worked really hard at it. And he ends up being a 5th round draft pick, who I think is going to have a real chance to play, and stick in the NFL. And I think that's one of the things I look at here. I mean, when I run down this list, Patrick Jones, Rashad Weaver, Jason Pinnock, Damar Hamlin, I would not be shocked at all if 5 years from now, 2026, all 4 of those guys are still in the NFL. Twyman, Jimmy Morrissey, the other 2 draft picks, I think have a really good chance of making it as well. It's going to be a little tougher. I mean, I think Twyman has some serious work to do. I think Morrissey, obviously is a 7th round pick as a center. I love the guy. He's going to have to work. Now, that's nothing new for him. Jimmy Morrissey's been grinding away up until this point. He's got to keep that up. And then, you're the undrafted guys, the rookie free agents. Alex Kessman signed with the Rams. Bryce Hargrove signed with the Falcons. Paris Ford, like I mentioned, with the Rams. And then DJ Turner with the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, those guys all have a chance. I think they're all capable of being NFL players and making NFL rosters, but they're going to have to find the right situation, and they're going to have to work really hard. And that's what it's going to come down to. For all 10 of these guys that we're talking about who are either drafted or signed as free agents, they've got to work. And if you're not willing to put in the work, then you're not going to last. You're not going to make it. And I think when you look at the Pitt guys who have made it in the NFL, who have stuck in the NFL, it's because they have proven that they are willing to grind it away and put in the work to get it done. Before we get to the comments and questions, one last thing on that. So 6 draft picks, most of any team in the ACC this year. Like I say, most by a Pitt team, most for a Pitt team, or most Pitt players in a single year since 2004. And yet they were played on a team that went 6-5 last year. How does that happen? Well, a couple things. And I think we make this mistake sometimes. I think we see draft success or NFL success, and then we look at the teams that those players played on and we say, why didn't they win more at Pitt? And I think we do this with Aaron Donald. Look at Aaron Donald. Oh, my God. He's the best player in the NFL. His teams went, 8-5 his freshman year, and then 6-7, 6-7, 7-6. Why did he never do better than that? How could you have Aaron Donald and not do better than that? Well, it's because Aaron Donald was one guy playing one position, and that position was not quarterback. Pitt had more players drafted than Clemson this year, but Clemson had the number 1 overall pick who was a quarterback. And that's why Clemson won and beat the crap out of Pitt, among other reasons. They had a lot of talent all over the place. But Pitt does not have the number 1 overall pick at quarterback in this year's draft. They don't have anybody picked in the first 2 rounds in this year's draft. It's great that you had a center drafted in the 7th round, that you had 2 guys drafted in the 6th. It's great that you had a guy drafted in the 5th. But those aren't the kinds of, that's not the talent level that championships are built on. You need that. You should be able to get something like that, get a couple of guys taken every year. You should never have a year where you don't have guys drafted, or else you've really kind of messed up on your recruiting and your evaluation and your development. But if you really want to find draft success that equates to overall success, you need high caliber players at important positions going in the top 2 rounds. And you need multiple guys like that. That's the kind of success, the kind of draft success that will equate to wins at Pitt. Now, I do think it's absolutely something that, going the other way, like we're talking about the time that led up to the draft. If you look at then the time going forward from the draft, I do think it's something Pitt can recruit on. I think they can say, look at this. We had 3 defensive linemen drafted. Look at this. We had 2 DBs drafted. Look at this. We got an offensive center drafted. And I think that can only help. I think Charlie Partridge has developed that reputation as a defensive line coach, and this is just further evidence. This is just further ammunition for him to use on the recruiting trail. Look at Patrick Jones. Look at Rashad Weaver. Look at Jalen Twyman. Jones and Weaver were 2-star recruits, and they came and worked with me and other 3rd and 4th round draft picks. That's what I can do, and I think that is resonating. I think if there's a message that Pitt is sending or selling to defensive line recruits, it's that. It's that, look, we've got really good defensive line play. We've got a great defensive line coach, and that's what you can come and be a part of. So I think you can sell on that. I don't always think that draft success equates to recruiting success, but it certainly doesn't hurt when you can send out a graphic with 6 guys that you got drafted. You could say we had the most drafted players of any team in the ACC. You stay out of the details that 3 of them were drafted in the final 2 rounds and all that. None of them were drafted in the first 2 rounds. You stay out of those details. You just say we had 6. We had more than any other team in this conference drafted this year. And you can recruit on that. No, there's any question about it. You can recruit on that. All right, let's jump into the chat, get into the conversations, see what people are talking about here tonight. We've got some super chatters jumping in, and I definitely want to get to those first. Of course, if you want to be a super chatter, you can click you can click a little $sign there, throw a couple bucks at the podcast. We appreciate that support, and we'll be sure to get to your questions and comments right off the bat. And so we got Michael B jumping in as a super chatter. He's one of our regulars, and we really appreciate it. Michael says, hi, Chris, 2 questions. Not sure if you already covered this, but do you think Paris Ford will land on an NFL roster and have a good NFL career? And second, what's your gut tell you about Justin Champagnie and Efton Reed? Thanks so much. All right. So, Paris, like I said, it's really going to come down to how hard Paris works. And I know he tweets a lot about how much he wants it. He tweets a lot about how he's being counted out. He tweets a lot about how he's an underdog. And he tweets a lot about how he's going to grind for it. And I hope he does. I did. Like I said, I'm pulling for him. I've been pulling for him for 6 years. I've wanted to see Paris succeed. And I will continue to pull for him. And we'll keep an eye on him in where the Rams play now? Los Angeles. But he's going to have to work. And at some point, he's going to have to understand, and I don't know, and I don't mean to say that he doesn't understand this, but he's going to have to take the attitude that my natural ability is not enough. I've got to go out and be, I've got to work harder. I've got to not just be a better athlete than everybody. I've got to work harder than everybody. And you know what? It's not the worst thing for him to be in Los Angeles with the Rams, because there's a guy that he'll be, in the defensive meetings with, who has done just that, who has said, I'm not just going to be the best defensive tackle in the NFL, I'm going to outwork everybody. Nobody's going to work harder than me. And that's Aaron Donald's approach. That's what he's done, and that's how he's become what he has become. It's through that hard work. And so Paris can learn from that, and I hope he does. There have been various points over the last couple of years where I hope that Paris's interactions with Aaron would give him some insight on what he needs to do to really get to the next level. That's something, just not to get off on too much of a tangent. That's something I think that does benefit Pitt, or it should at least. With Aaron Donald coming back in the offseason and during his off time and working out at the indoor facility, works with Dwayne Brown and the 210s guys, the speed training, speed and agility training, and he comes back and works with them. And I think it's good for Pitt's players to see Aaron Donald, 3-time defensive player of the year, like I say, top 5 player in the league, top 10 at worst overall. Definitely, number 1 top defensive player in the league, and to see him grinding away, working harder than they might be. I think that's really a benefit for Pitt. I think the coaches can point to that and say, look, this is the best player in the NFL, and he's out here working harder than you guys. He's already at that level. He has made it to that level. He's gotten paid. He's gotten the contracts. He's got the hardware. And he's still working harder than you, who says you guys who say you want to get to that level. This is what you need to do. This is how hard you need to work. I think that's a real benefit for Pitt. I think the coaches do point to it, and I think they should point to it because it's a lesson for those guys to learn. Paris needs to be a shadow for Aaron Donald in Los Angeles. And everywhere Aaron goes, Paris needs to go. And everything Aaron does, Paris needs to do it. And he needs to have the mindset of, I'm going to do it even better than Aaron. If Aaron does 2 reps of this agility drill, I'm going to do 3. If Aaron runs, whatever, in 5 seconds, I'm going to run it in 4. He needs to have that mentality, because if he does and he really commits to it, he can stick in the NFL and play for a long time. I don't have any doubt about that, but he's got to commit to that. And then second, what's your gut tell you about Justin Champagnie and Efton Reed? My gut, I don't know. I had some fried rice for dinner tonight, so my gut's feeling weird. No, just kidding. You see, somebody just posted on the message boards about a mock draft with Justin Champagnie being outside the top 65 guys, on one of the latest mock drafts or overall rankings, 65, 66, somewhere around there. If that's truly the case, then he should come back to college and develop his game, work on some of those elements that he's probably getting feedback about. That NBA scouts and evaluators have probably told him, you need to get better at this, you need to get better at this, you need to get better at this. If the feedback he's getting is that he's really outside the top 60, he should come back. Now, here's the thing, and I think we learned this just watching the NFL draft, right? You can't go by what you read online for where a guy is ranked, because you're not getting an honest assessment. NBA teams, just like NFL teams, aren't trying to give out their intel. They're not trying to tell everybody what they really think, and that's why, I crack up when we talk about Kevin Colbert or any of these guys, what they said before the draft. When do we don't put any stock in what they actually say, because we don't take those words at face value. Mock drafts, I think they're based on intel. I think they're based on sources. I also don't think there's a whole lot of actionable intelligence. Intel, I shouldn't say intelligence. Actionable intel in those mock drafts. What's happening right now is Justin Champagnie, I believe Justin Champagnie, through Jeff Capel and other people that he's probably been in contact with, is getting honest feedback from NBA scouts. Now, there are people who are going to give him positive feedback because they want him to go to the NBA for their own personal gain. And that doesn't necessarily mean that he shouldn't go to the NBA, but there are those people who are going to be doing that. I imagine that there are people who are giving him negative feedback who, would rather, see him come back for their own personal gain. I don't think Jeff Capel is doing that. I think Jeff Capel was trying to give him the most honest feedback, because obviously it's good for Capel's career. If Justin Champagnie comes back, it increases the chances of Pitt winning a lot of basketball games next year. But it's also, Justin Champagnie going to the NBA and having success is something Capel can recruit on as well. Given the option, Capel would probably say he would want Champagnie back, I would think. Although there is a part of me that believes Jeff Capel is sincere in wanting the best for his players, and that, if you could get Jeff Capel to be honest, what would be your best case scenario? He would probably say, my best case scenario is whatever's best for Justin. And I kind of believe him about that. So I don't know. I don't know I don't know what kind of honest feedback Champagnie is getting. I don't know what kind of honest feedback, or I don't know what kind of feedback he's getting from NBA scouts, from NBA evaluators, and the people who can really give him an honest assessment of where he stands as the draft gets closer. He's still got another month and a half, before he really needs to make that final decision on whether he's staying in the draft or coming back to college. And we'll see what decision he makes. And I think it'll be based on that information that he receives, that feedback he receives. As for Efton Reed, the 5-star center, what does my gut say on Efton Reed? My gut says that Pitt is still very much in the mix. My gut says that Pitt has a good relationship with Efton Reed, has a good chance with Efton Reed. My gut also says that Will Wade and Leonard Hamilton are very good recruiters, and LSU and Florida State are very good programs that can make it very difficult, that are tough to beat on the recruiting trail. So I don't know. I don't have a gut feeling on what Efton Reed is going to do. I don't think Pitt's out of it. I think they're very much in the mix, and I think they're battling as much as they can. But you're up against some stiff competition, and that can be tough. It can be really tough. Let me see here. RJ Seaman 38 jumped in as a super chatter, and I appreciate that. I don't see where your question is though. So if you got a question, throw it in there. We'll get it. We'll get to it. Let's see here. Jump into some of the other questions and comments in the chat, and we appreciate everybody who gets on the live stream and throws some questions and comments in there, because like I say, it's fun. It's like a little back and forth that we can have. S-Max says, Chris, have you talked to Efton Reed this week? Ha. Yeah, right. Nobody talks to Efton Reed. Josh Newark, better question. Have you talked to Mama Bear this week? Yeah, that's Efton Reed's mom seems to have, spread most of the news about his recruitment thus far, at least as far as announcing that April 15th was going to be a commitment date for him, and then announcing on April 15th that he wasn't going to commit on April 15th. So it's, you kind of, she's the spokesperson, I guess, at this point, because Efton Reed's not saying much on his on his own. So we're all just kind of waiting and seeing what we can dig up. And it's funny because, no matter, whoever you talk to different people around Reed. You talk to different people around Pitt. Nobody knows. Nobody knows what's going on. And we should have all gotten this impression a couple weeks ago when it was almost April 15th and his commitment was coming, and there were people claiming that they knew what he was going to do, claiming that they knew what was going on, and clearly they were wrong because he didn't commit. I put a tweet out, I don't think it was on the 15th, but maybe a couple days earlier. I think that was like a Thursday. I might have tweeted on like Monday or something that I don't think there's anyone. I said, I don't think anyone really knows what Efton Reed is going to do. And so people replied and said, well, I hope Efton Reed knows what he's going to do. And I said, I don't really even know if he knows. And sure enough, a few days later, it turns out he didn't know what he was going to do. This is one of the stranger recruitments I've covered in a long time. I can't remember too many that are like this. And it's, I don't know. Yeah, I really don't know. And we keep trying to find info from different sources. We keep trying to find info from different people, and just nobody has anything. Nobody knows what's going on. I think at different points, different coaching staffs, whether it's Pitt or Ohio State or LSU or Florida State or whoever, have expressed confidence, but I don't even know if they knew when they did that. So we'll just keep watching. Josh Newark says, shout out to men's soccer, and they made the Sweet 16. Yeah, we got a couple comments about some of the other sports that, Dan Juby says, quick shout out to baseball, volleyball, and men's soccer, even wrestling. Awesome stuff this spring. Pitt is on the rise. Yeah, Pitt really, the non-football, non-basketball sports right now are rolling. They're having some real success, to the point where you see Heather Lyke nominated for Athletic Director of the Year by, I think it was Sports Business Journal or something like that. Which I think she prefers Director of Athletics as the title, but Athletic Director, you take it. It's a worthwhile award. And while football and basketball, particularly men's basketball, but I mean you could throw the women's program in as well. We know those are the two prominent programs, though, football and men's basketball, and they haven't had the success that everyone would like to see. Probably most of all Heather Lyke. But all of these other programs, are I think are a source of pride for Pitt, and they should be, because I think it's Heather Lyke said it from the time she came in. She wanted, I think her phrase was comprehensive excellence. She wanted comprehensive excellence, and that meant having not just football be good or not just men's basketball be good, but all of the programs be good. And she's attacked it with facilities. She's hired coaches. She's extended coaches and retained coaches. I think she's done a good job in a lot of regards. Now, ultimately, if you're an athletic director, you're going to get judged on football and men's basketball. Those are the things that, you're going to, a lot of your grades are going to come from that. And those two programs have to improve, or else Heather Lyke is going to be known as the athletic director who sure, helped a lot of programs get better, but, football and men's basketball floundered under her watch. So she's, obviously needs some priorities there and has some priorities there. She made the move with Kevin Stallings and hired Jeff Capel, but now she needs those things to work out. The biggest thing she can do, because obviously she can't coach, she can't recruit, she can't call plays or anything like that. The biggest thing she can do is make sure that Capel and Narduzzi have what they need to run their programs at the highest level. This is the thing you do as an athletic director. You say, okay, I've hired you. I hired you to be the football coach. I hired you to be the basketball coach. And I know she didn't hire Pat Narduzzi, but you understand what I'm saying. If you're an athletic director, you say, okay, you're my guy. You're my girl. You're coaching these programs. I'm going to give you all the resources you need. I'm going to, within reason. I'm going to give you as much resources as I can, so that you feel fully supported. And you kind of have to let the coach go out and win or lose on their own. And people talk about, she needs to force him to fire this coach, or she needs to force him to change his assistant coaching staff. I don't think you do that. I think you didn't hire them to be sort of a conduit for you to be the coach. You hired them to run the program. You're not running the program. You hired that coach to run the program. And if that coach believes in his assistant coaches, because his job is to build the program, his job is to hire the assistant coaches, his job is to build a coaching staff that'll win games. And if that coach feels like he's got the best assistant coaching staff in place, then you let him go with it. And if it fails, you fire them all. And if it works, you give them a pat on the back and a raise. I think, and we often talk about this, the athletic director should make him fire this coach, or athletic director should make him fire that coach, or something. I think that's the path to a toxic relationship between the head coach and the athletic director, and that really only kind of ends one way. There aren't many positive outcomes that would come, out of having a bad relationship between the head coach and the athletic director. I think it's a bad scenario. It's a bad situation that you don't want to be in. So you let the coach coach, you let the coach build the program, and if it fails, you fire him. You hire somebody new and try again. All right, that was a tangent. I don't know where just because we were talking about some of the other sports that are having success. I don't think there's any question about it. Let's see. John Casale. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name, but you remind me of the guy who was in The Godfather. You remind me of Fredo with that name, unless you're trying to. But he says, I think it's quite clear that the kids who sat out didn't benefit in the draft. And Royce Beacom follows up and says the NFL directly and the Steelers directly sent the message that that guys who didn't play last year or sat out part of the year would be detrimental, or sent the message to the draftees that not playing or sitting out or opting out will be detrimental to draft status. Yes and no. All right. So I think if your film from 2019 was good enough and you had a good enough pro day that showed you stayed in shape and kept working out and haven't just been sitting around, I don't think it hurt them all that much, right? Jamar Chase sat out, right? He seemed to do just fine. I think if there was a guy like Jalen Twyman or Paris Ford, they had things they had to show. Look, if Rashad Weaver sat out 2020, he probably goes undrafted. And that's because he had things he needed to prove. He had things he needed to show. Obviously because he didn't play in 2019. I think Jason Pinnock helped himself with his senior season, but if Pinnock had sat out 2020, but had the pro day that he had, maybe he doesn't go in the 5th, but I think he still gets drafted. Just because I think he showed some positive things. I think you could help yourself by playing in 2020, by not opting out. The way you hurt yourself was by other guys who did play jumping over you by proving what they can do. Does that make sense? I think that's where the distinction kind of comes in. It wasn't like, oh, this guy didn't play, drop him down 5 spots. It was, this guy didn't play, so we don't really have any reason to move him up. All we've seen is the film from 2019 and his pro day. And unless his pro day was insanely good, we're not going to move him up many spots. Whereas this other guy, we saw his senior film, he developed, he got better, we moved him up because of new information. With these guys who opted out, there was no new information. Let's see here. Scrolling down through, get a few more comments before we wrap it up here. Eric Rogers says, I've said since the schedule came out, I think the Tennessee game will determine which way this season goes. Do you like our chances versus Tennessee? I mean, it looks like their program's kind of in some upheaval. They obviously had a coaching change, brand new first-year coach. Just like last year, Pitt played a brand new first-year coach at Boston College, and that game was on the road too. And so I don't know if that's a guarantee lock. I don't know if that game's going to determine which way the season goes, Eric. I think they definitely have to I think it's very important that they go undefeated in the non-conference this year. I think this is the most winnable non-conference schedule they've had in a long time, and I think they need to go undefeated in the non-conference for the first time in forever, not counting last year when they only had one non-conference game and they went 1-0. They've never gone undefeated in the non-conference. Pitt. Ever since they joined a conference, ever since they've had non-conference games to play, they've never gone undefeated in the non-conference. This is the year it should happen. But really, the games that are going to determine the end result, the end record, and whether this season's a success or not, it's the 4 games I always talk about. It's Syracuse, Georgia Tech, Duke, and Virginia. All right? You sweep those 4, and you should. All right? That's key. Because look, if you could beat those 4, right? Follow me on this math here. If you beat those 4, Duke, Virginia, Syracuse, Georgia Tech, and those are 4 games you really should win every year. 4 years out of 5, you should win. You should go 4-0 against those teams, and that's more or less what Narduzzi has been. You go 4-0 against those 4 teams. You go 4-0 in the non-conference. You got 8 wins, and now you've got Miami, Carolina, Clemson, and Virginia Tech to determine really what the season is. If it ends up is going to be like a 9-4 season with a win in the bowl game, or if it's going to be a double-digit win season. But the thing you have to do first is take care of those 4 non-conference games and those 4 winnable ACC games, and that's going to be the case every year. Those 4 games in the conference, and I've talked about this a lot before. You can't slip up against those teams. If you slip up against those teams, then you set yourself up for, like 2017 when they went 5-7. They lost to Georgia Tech. They lost to Syracuse. You need to win those 4 games. You go 4-0 in those games, then your non-conference gets you at least to 7, if not 8, every year. And then you're not playing with house money, but you have a chance to make those other games, the Carolina, the Virginia Tech, the Miami, and then, this year Clemson. Those can be the games that really determine the success of your season. Whereas in 2016, beating Clemson really just helped them get to 8 wins, right? Because I think they won out after that game. They got beat by Miami, and then they beat Clemson and Duke and Syracuse. So they needed to beat Clemson just to get to 8 wins in the regular season. 2017, they needed to beat Miami just to get 5 wins in the regular season. You have to take care of your 4 non-conference games and those 4 ACC games so that you're at 8, and then you can really build. And if you don't win any of the other 4 games, you're still at 8, and you got a chance to get to 9 with a bowl game. And if you win one of those games, now you're at 9-3, and you got a chance to get to 10 with a bowl game. You can keep adding this up. You get 2 games. You beat Virginia Tech, and maybe you beat Carolina for the second time in a row. Now you're at 11. Or what? You're at 10. 10 in the regular season. You're at 10-2. You're ranked. You're going to a bowl game with probably against a pretty good opponent with a chance to go 11-2. Those are the games. I don't think there's one game that swings it one way or the other. Maybe Tennessee, just because that ostensibly is going to be the toughest game out of the non-conference schedule. So, if I'm talking about getting the 4 wins in the ACC and the 4 wins in the non-conference, yeah, I guess Tennessee is pretty significant. They should go down to Tennessee, and they should win. That's my thought. All right, let's get a couple more in here before we roll out. Josh Newark, did Jones, Twyman, and Weaver ever play on the same line at the same time? That's a good question. Obviously, in 2019, Rashad Weaver missed the whole season. 2018, they all played together. Twyman was a redshirt freshman. He was not a starter, but he was he was a backup. He was a regular contributor. Let me see. bring up his stats real quick and see what he did in 2018. He played in 13 games, made one start. He had 16 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and a sack assist. So that was the extent of it. Yeah, they played together that year. They were not all starters on the defensive line at the same time. It's a good point, Josh. Bart Simpson says somebody's going to offer the defensive line coach a lot of money. Hope he stays. He's a great coach. He is a great coach, Charlie Partridge. He's always been known as a great recruiter, but he's really shown in the last 5 years that he's been at Pitt, 4 or 5 years, that he's a great coach as well. And you're right. Someone is going to offer him a lot of money, and I think other teams have offered him quite a bit of money. And Pitt has been able to step up and keep him the last few seasons. Eventually, they're not going to be able to do that. Eventually, he is going to get an offer that's too good to turn down, and he's going to go. Maybe to be a defensive coordinator, maybe just a lot of money in the SEC or something like that. He's turned down other opportunities. Pitt has stepped up when he's had some other opportunities, and he needs to, they need to do everything they can to keep him, but nothing lasts forever, right? Let's see. RJ Seaman 38, who says, who's one of our super chatters, we'll give him the floor here. He says Heather Lyke needs to be a boss, and that means accountability, and she has not made adjustments to offset failures by money-generating sports. If Mark Whipple fails to break into a top 40 offense, is Pat Narduzzi fired? Well, it depends on the overall record. If they finish outside of the top 40 in scoring offense and they still end up winning 9 or 10 games, then no, you're not going to fire Narduzzi. If he wins 8 games, no, I don't know if you would necessarily fire him then. As far as accountability, I don't even know if Heather Lyke wanted Pat Narduzzi to fire Mark Whipple. I do believe that Heather Lyke believes that the coaches should make their decisions. The head coaches should make those decisions. And the accountability exists because I'm sure she makes it clear to all of her head coaches that they are responsible and accountable for their programs. And if the program's not succeeding, the head coach has to do what's necessary to get it to succeed. And she'll offer as much support as she can, whether that's offering, a lot of money to hire a new coach or paying more money to keep coaches or whatever it is. But the accountability comes in saying your program needs to succeed at a certain level, and you need to do the things necessary to get to that level. I think that's the accountability. All right, final one. Rupa Trupa says, what players from Pitt do you think will be drafted next year other than Kenny Pickett? This is an interesting question. We actually had a conversation about this on the message boards, and I think we'll continue to talk about it, throughout the offseason. I know I'm going to write about it in the 321 column this Friday, and we'll talk about it, like I say, throughout the offseason. I don't know how many locks there are right now of draft picks. I think there's a bunch of guys who are borderline who could play themselves into a strong draft position. So I look on defense, I look at like Deslin Alexandra, I look at Phil Campbell, I look at Cam Bright. It's 3 seniors, right? Even Damari Mathis, I guess. And I think all 4 of those seniors, to varying degrees, could play themselves into a draft position with a good senior season and a strong pro day. I think they could do like Jason Pinnock did. I think Damari Mathis could do what Jason Pinnock did. I think Cam Bright could do what Jason Pinnock did and have a strong senior season, put good tape out there from this 2021 season, and then really kill it at pro day, which means training really hard and being prepared for it. Or even the combine if they end up getting drafted there. I think those guys will have a shot. I don't know if they're locks to be drafted right now. I think they need to improve their stock. You know what I mean? I think they're borderline at this point. I think that I think Lucas Krull has the measurables to be a draft pick, but he has no film. There's nothing you're going to look at. He has 1 catch at Pitt and not much more than that at Florida. But he'll have an opportunity this year if he earns it. He'll have an opportunity to catch a lot of passes, to make a lot of plays. And look, there he is. Perfect synergy. I put a picture of him right on the screen just as I'm talking about him. He'll have an opportunity to catch a lot of passes like he did in the spring game. And if he plays like he did in the spring game or something close to it, then yeah, he's gonna have a really good opportunity to get drafted. I think Kenny Pickett's going to have an opportunity to get drafted. I think, it'll be interesting to see some of the offensive linemen and where those guys kind of end up, because there are a few seniors in there that I think could have the potential. But again, they're borderline guys. I'm not sure Pitt has, going into last season, last year, this time, I guess, you were talking about Hamlin. You were talking about Twyman. You were talking about Ford. You were talking about these guys. You were talking about Jones. Weren't really talking about Weaver because you didn't know how he was going to be coming back from his ACL injury. But you were talking about all these guys at this point. Right now, I don't think it's as clear cut with the 2021 roster, but I think there are a bunch of guys who could play themselves into that position. So they got to have a big senior season. They got to have a big year in 2021 and earn their way onto the draft boards. And then we'll see what happens. All right, make sure you go to Homefield, homefieldapparel.com. Great Pitt shirts, super soft, great logos. They look awesome. They feel awesome. Can't recommend them enough. They have great stuff. Homefieldapparel.com. And, of course, Panther-Lair.com. That website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. You can get all your latest Pitt sports news, football, basketball, recruiting. It's all right there at Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for everybody tuning in on the live stream tonight. It's been a lot of fun talking Pitt sports with you. And, of course, thanks to everybody who listens to the podcast throughout the week or watches the stream throughout the week. If you want to get in on the conversation, every Tuesday night at 8:30, it's youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Laircom. So make sure you check it out. We'd love to have you join us, get in on the conversation, and join the discussion. Saturday mornings, 8 a.m., we'll have the Panthers Insider Show, so you can tune into that for more Pitt sports talk. And, of course, just stay tuned to Panther-Lair.com for everything you need. Panther-Lair.com. Thanks again for everybody joining tonight. Hope you have a great rest of the night. Hope you have a great rest of the week. We'll talk to you next Tuesday night at 8:30 for the Panther-Lair Show.